Optimal minimalism.
At this altitude, I can run flat out for a half mile before my hands start shaking.
Can I answer your personal question?
Now would seem an appropriate time.
What if I did the opposite?
I'm a cybernetic organism, living tissue over a metal endoskeleton.
Tim Ferriss Show.
This episode is brought to you by AG1, the daily foundational nutritional supplement that supports whole body health. And I do get asked a lot what I would take if I could only take one supplement. And the true answer is invariably AG1. It simply covers a ton of bases. I usually drink it in the mornings and frequently take their travel packs with me on the road. So what is AG1? AG1 is a science-driven formulation of vitamins, probiotics, and whole food sourced nutrients. In a single scoop, AG1 gives you support for the brain, gut, and immune system. So take ownership of your health and try AG1 today. You will get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first subscription purchase. So learn more, check it out. Go to drinkag1.com/Tim. That's drinkag1, the number one, drinkag1.com/Tim. Last time, drinkag1.com/Tim. Check it out. Hello, boys and girls. This is Tim Ferriss, and welcome to another episode of The Tim Ferriss Show. My guest today is Daniel H. Pink, at Daniel Pink on Twitter. He is the author of 6 provocative books, including his newest, When, subtitle, The Scientific Secrets of Perfect Timing. When is a New York Times, Wall Street Journal, USA Today, Washington Post, and Publishers Weekly bestseller. That's a lot of lists. Pink's other books include the long-running New York Times bestseller, A Whole New Mind, and the #1 New York Times bestsellers, Drive and To Sell is Human. His books have won multiple awards and have been translated into 37 languages at last count. He lives in Washington, D.C. with his family. You can also find his work, his various goings-on at danpink.com. And if Facebook is your thing, facebook.com/Daniel H. Pink. Dan, welcome to the show.
Tim, thanks for having me.
It has been quite a while since we Several years. And I know we were talking about all things Japanese, most likely, at least in one of our recent conversations based on one of your books. And maybe you could tell people, actually, just as context, a little bit about that book that we were chatting about in manga format or Japanese comic format. And we'll use that as a jumping off point.
Yes, indeed. That was one of my best ideas that didn't go anywhere. So that was a book called The Adventures of Johnny Bunko. And as you say, Tim, it was written in the Japanese comic format known as manga. And as you know, as a Japanophile, in Japan, manga, the comic format, is much more versatile and more widely used than it is here in the United States. So you have grown-ups reading comics, and they can be things about financial advice, things about love life, things about history. And so I did a fellowship in Japan with my wife and our 3 kids where I studied the manga industry. And I came back and said, you know what? I think it's time for manga to broaden its reach here in the United States of America. So I wrote a book called The Adventures of Johnny Bunko, and it's a graphic novel in manga form that reveals the 6 essential lessons of any satisfying, productive career through the story of a hapless young accountant named Johnny Bunko.
That was a fantastically concise description. And I wanted to also, you said in the beginning that it was the best idea that didn't go anywhere, or something along those lines. And I wanted to bring up the book because it seems for those people it struck a chord with, it struck a very deep chord. And I believe it was Kevin Kelly, arguably the most interesting man in the world, who was on this podcast.
Indeed.
And he mentioned that that book was, at least at the time, his most gifted book. So I wanted to at least highlight the fact that if it's good enough for Kevin Kelly, it should be good enough for many, many other people.
That's exactly right. Now, Kevin did say that, and I actually think it's a good book. We did reasonably well with it. It didn't blow off the doors. I think I was, and this is a common thing that happens in life and in investing, in entrepreneurship, and publishing, and anything, is that you could be right too early. I think that's what it was. That I actually think that this format of graphic novels and comics having a more expansive reach in the United States is probably going to happen. I might have been, as they would say in the world of politics, I might have been a little ahead of the voters.
Or using a surfing metaphor, paddling a little too early for the wave, which
Same thing.
Which sometimes means you don't catch a wave. In investing, it sometimes means you paddle right into the impact zone and then get smashed. Now, you mentioned politics. I wasn't going to go here right away.
Oh boy! Okay.
And I'm going to get there in two hops. But so I'm looking at in front of me the Yale Law and Policy Review, Volume 8, Number 2, 1990, and it says at the top.
This is like a deposition now. What do you have, like Exhibit A? Did I say something 30 years ago that you're going to make me pay for right now?
I'm auditioning, indirectly, albeit, for my role on True TV as talent. Okay. But this won't go into any incriminating territory unless you volunteer something along those lines, which I doubt will happen. But it says on top, Editor-in-Chief Daniel H. Pink. So how did fate intervene that you are not currently in the legal profession?
Oh my God! This is one area where I want to thank fate for her grace and kindness. Here's the thing. I went to law school, and I went to law school largely because I was a middle-class kid from the middle of America, and that's kind of what you did. And once I sort of saw the inside, and it was a terrible decision, and it actually helped me figure out how to make better decisions. It gave me some actually really good advice on how to make better decisions. But I basically went to law school without knowing what lawyers did or even what law school was. It was just something I did because that's what I was supposed to do. I found out I didn't really like it very much. And once I found out what lawyers actually did, and God bless the lawyers listening to this, but once I found out what lawyers actually did, I was like, oh, you hire somebody else to do that. It's like it takes skill to like plunge a toilet or, that kind of thing. Or mow a gigantic backyard. I mean, it takes skill to do that. It's just that, it's really not my thing. And so what I'd rather do is do something else and then pay someone else to do that kind of dirty work. And yet I found myself stuck. And because I was risk averse, I did leave for a little while, actually. I dropped out for a little while, but I came back. And so I went through law. So I went through law school. It wasn't accumulated massive student loans, but I was very fortunate in two dimensions in my law school trajectory. One was that my school had a very ahead of its time loan payback program, keyed to salary. So if you made less than a certain amount, they would offer assistance in repaying your student loans. And that gave people much more. Not many people took it, but that gave you theoretically more career flexibility if you decided not to practice law. The other thing is that I met my wife in law school, so it's a decision that ended up having a profound positive effect on my life.
How did it help you learn to make better decisions?
Going to law school? Right.
You said that.
Oh, well, here's the thing. Okay, here's what it did. Here's the thing. So there's this principle in social science. It has a fancy name, but it is something that we all do and something that we should do. Is the principle of surrogation. Okay. How do you make decisions? You use the principle of surrogation, and surrogation basically means find someone like you who made this decision and see what happened to him or her. That is, find out what it's really like. Again, this is a totally fancified way of something that is very commonsensical. Should I go to this restaurant? Well, let me check the Yelp reviews of 47 other people who've gone to this restaurant. And what I did, and it's amazing to me, Tim, when I think about this, and it's advice that I give to my own kids as well. I went to law school literally having never spent a day, not a day, 10 minutes talking to a lawyer about what she did. I'm embarrassed to say that, but that's absolutely the case. I went to law school having never sat in on a law school class. I mean, it's unbelievable to me in retrospect. And so had I done those kinds of things, I might have approached it more skeptically. But I didn't do those things. And so, and because that ended up being an incredibly expensive decision, even though it led to it led to the most positive thing in my life, which is my wife. Even though it led to something positive, it was a terrible decision. So now I'm sort of a surrogation ideologue. It's like I believe in surrogation for everything. Largely because I got bitten by that bad decision.
Could you give us an example of at some fork in the road or some prospective decision where you've used surrogation or where you're planning on using it?
Okay, so I'll give you an example of it. So again, and it's, again, we're not talking rocket science here. We're talking like basically, hey, act like a reasonably intelligent grown-up is basically what I'm doing here. But let's go back to the Japan thing. So I got a fellowship to go to Japan, and I went with my wife and our kids, as I mentioned. But before I did that, I talked to 6 different people who had the same fellowship. Before I accepted, 6 different people who had the same fellowship, what it was like for their kids, what the work was like, what the living was like before I made the decision. Now, again, that is not a monumental intellectual breakthrough, but it's something that I didn't do when I was much younger.
Well, it's a best practice that can often get skipped, right? Whether that's something like this or something that should be very straightforward. If you look at, say, Atul Gawande's work in the Checklist Manifesto and checking various things to avoid bacterial line infections in a hospital, right? It's very straightforward, but if you neglect it over time, bad things are going to happen.
But it's also I think that as I've gotten older and gotten more experience, I've actually become much more aware of the importance of intellectual humility. And like when I think of when I was younger, I feel, well, I know what law school is like. How do you know? Well, I just know because I thought about it once. And so I know. I know what lawyers do because I met somebody who was a lawyer and I know what lawyers, and so there's a degree of arrogance in that, of thinking that you know something when you actually don't. And so if you approach all kinds of decisions with a degree of intellectual humility and ask yourself, what don't I know about this? Where are my blind spots? Then I think you end up making better decisions.
Definitely. Speaking of blind spots, I promised I would segue into politics, and that is somewhere I have very, very little confidence in any of my knowledge or expertise. How did you, because I was looking at what I believe to be one of your first articles that really, I'm not going to say put you on the map, that's too much of an overstatement, but the Free Agent Nation article in Fast Company, which was at the end of 1990s.
20 years ago.
Yeah, 1997. Yeah. And in the bio, or the byline rather, of that article, it says, until recently, chief speechwriter to Vice President Al Gore. So where did you go from law school or dropping out of law school for a period of time to speechwriting for then Vice President Al Gore?
Well, when I graduated from law school, I was actually very keenly interested in politics. It was probably my deepest interest at the time. And I said, you know what, I'm going to go work. I'm going to work in politics.
Why was it interesting to you at the time?
A couple of reasons. Number one is that I thought it was a venue for achieving something in the world and making a contribution to the world. The other thing is that I found the actual practice of it quite exciting and interesting in the way that sports is exciting and interesting. So it was a combo platter for me. And I'd been interested in it for many, many years. And I said, okay, this is what I want to do. So I got out of law school and I started working on political campaigns, which at the time I liked because political campaigns are totally interesting. I mean, again, it's like a sport in that there's a beginning and there's an end and there's a very clear outcome. And it's exciting and you're making decisions on the fly. And I find political campaigns more than other kinds of organizations and institutions fairly meritocratic because there's so much going on and so much crazy stuff happening that if you can do something, you will continue. You'll be asked to do it again. And that's pretty much what happened to me. And that someone at some point asked me to write a speech and I did it and it was okay. And then they said, hey, that's okay. You want to do it again? And I did it again. And then I did it a third time. And all of a sudden that was my job. And it ended up being something that I had a certain affinity for. And it's something that a lot of other people did not. And so just in the supply and demand of who has to do what, that's what I ended up doing. And I enjoyed it. I did it on political campaigns. I did it for a cabinet secretary. And then I ended up doing it for the vice president. And the trouble is that when I had spent all these years in the belly of the beast, it's sort of like, wow, I really want to work in politics. And all of a sudden, in a pretty kind of half-assed way, I was at a pretty good gig in the belly of the beast, I realized, hey, I'm not sure this is my thing. I thought this was my thing, but I'm discovering that this is not my thing. And what's even worse is that if I project out even further and look at, say, what I'm going to be like or what I'm going to be doing in 10 years or 20 years, I really don't like that picture because I see some of those people around me.
Now, is there anything besides the projecting forward, looking at the people who had been in the game, so to speak, for a longer period of time and saying, wow, I could see myself filling their shoes and I don't like what that looks like. Was there anything else, any other indicators or moments that made you realize it wasn't for you?
There were a few things. First of all, the amount of BS that was involved was startling to me. I expected some, but if you do a pie chart of BS and not BS, the BS slice is extraordinarily large, larger than you would imagine on a number of different dimensions. And here's the thing, Tim, I freaking lucked out too in who I was working for, because my last two jobs, I worked for Al Gore, who's a very smart guy and a very good guy all around. And before that, I worked for the then labor secretary. I was a speechwriter for the then labor secretary, a guy named Robert Reich, who's a very smart guy and a good guy. So I had basically the best kinds of bosses you could possibly have. And so that was another indication. Like, I got the best bosses you could possibly have. And I still it's not the species of Reich or Gore I don't like. It's the genus of politics that is actually bringing me down, And so among the things that I didn't like, let's go back to the BS. There was an enormous amount of time spent basically in the air in almost everything that was going on within the boundaries of the law, obviously, concern for basically pandering and fundraising. It was really quite remarkable. The other thing is that I also felt like a lot of the people who were good people, that they were so interested, they were so absorbed in the mechanics of things that I felt like I was losing sight over like what we were doing here in the first place.
Right.
What did we actually believe in? That and there was so much short-termism, so much short-term insane kind of posturing and let's get this slight advantage over the day. And it was like, what's the point? What's the point of all this? I'm working really, really hard, and I'm not sure we're actually doing that much. And here's the scary part: is like, that was 20 years ago. In retrospect, those are the good old days. All right. I mean, I'm old enough. I did this long enough ago where I'd be pumped when something I wrote made it onto the quote unquote evening news. I haven't watched the evening news for 19 years, we weren't dealing with social media. The world was very, very, very partisan then, but nothing like the way it is now. So I remember devoting a couple of days in my office to some subpoena that was given to Gore's office for finding some document about some nonsense thing. And I'm like, I'm like really concerned about that because I didn't do anything wrong, but it's like, oh my God, if I have an email that mentions X, Y, or Z and I don't find it and then someone else finds it, like, I'm going to have to hire a lawyer, and I didn't sign up for this garbage. So I finally decided to, So again, this thing that I thought I was deeply, deeply interested in, once I actually experienced it, I found myself far less interested in it than I would have suspected. If you had told me that when I left that job, if you had told me 10 years earlier, like, you're going to have this job and you're going to leave it because you're tired of politics, I would have been very, very surprised.
And if you look back at that experience, the skills you either had natively or developed, how do you prepare your speeches now? Or maybe if we take an example of a speech that you've given that has received very positive feedback, or really, from your perspective, engage the audience. How do you go about preparing a 30-minute, 60-minute speech? What does that look like? Is there any example that you can give us?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. I mean, actually, that experience writing speeches was actually extraordinarily useful in going out and, being a writer and then going out and talking about what I've written about. I mean, it's extraordinarily useful. I mean, if for no other reason, Tim, it was because, I spent a lot of time as a speechwriter watching audiences react, seeing what worked and what didn't. And that, I think, completely left an imprint on me. Again, I was able, I had this before I went out on doing it myself. I spent, as much time as any human being could have done, like watching speeches being given. But I always would watch when any of my bosses would give a speech, I would actually watch the audience rather than my boss to see, because that's how I learned how to get better at it. Hey, that line works. Hey, that line's a dud. Hey, they're spacing out here. Hey, this person over here looks confused. Wow, this went on too long. Wow, this could have gone on a little. Well, I've never had the experience that could have gone on longer, but this, this could have seriously, we could have cut it out there. And so seeing audiences react just gave me. I mean, it's almost like. Let me think of an analogy here. Okay, I mean, this is an imperfect analogy, but it's almost like I'm going to go basically walk up and down the streets of Santiago, Chile for a couple of years. I'm not going to do any talking, but I'm going to listen to everybody else talking. And it's like, whoa, you can learn some Spanish that way. You're not going to be perfectly Spanish, but you have a huge advantage of someone if you do that and then go and say, hey, I think I'm going to learn how to speak Spanish.
It also makes me think of a very useful feature for potential speakers, although it's probably not worth the labor for the TED organization, would be to take the camera C that's always pointed at the audience and give you the option of listening to TED Talks while watching the audience respond.
That's an interesting idea. I mean, they do cutaways on those kinds of things, but the cutaways don't show people being bored.
Right, exactly.
That's actually more revealing than anything else. And I'll tell you, like from a speech giver's point of view, and it's interesting you raise this, Tim, because I haven't really thought a huge amount about it myself. But one of the things that I enjoy most about giving talks is seeing the audience's reaction and figuring out what's good and what isn't. So if I come up with, hey, I got this killer line I just thought of, this is going to totally rule, and then I deliver it, and it's like, whoa, that bombed. And in my head, I don't feel like, oh, I'm so sad that it bombed. But in the back of my head, I'm like, that bombed. That's so interesting. I got to make a note of that. Like that one bombed. And why did that one bomb? Did people not understand it? Was it obnoxious? And so I love that part of, and when you give speeches, when you do something in real time with people, or really anything before an audience. So if you and I were talking before a live audience, we would be getting feedback on our conversation that I think would be really useful and interesting. And when you do things that are asynchronous, as we're doing now, or writing a book, which is asynchronous, you get that feedback much later. And so the feedback is less meaningful. So if I write something and someone says, you wrote this passage here, I just don't get it. That's sort of a bummer for me because I don't have time to cure it. But if I say something before an audience and I get a bunch of blank looks, I immediately know, wow, okay, I didn't explain that very well. I got to go back next time around and explain it better.
So I've so many different questions I want to dig into related to what you just said. The first is actually connected to something we were talking about just before we hit record. And that was you having listened to the interview I did with Brian Koppelman, the screenwriter, filmmaker, co-creator of the hit show Billions, among many other things. And his penchant and recommendation for forensically studying film, watching films with a notebook in hand and taking notes on what worked, what didn't, his responses and so on. And you mentioned a number of different questions and cues that you might ask yourself while watching in your speechwriter days the audience while you're essentially your boss is giving a talk. would you be
Right.
writing those things down? Would you be sitting there kind of with a notebook in hand recording this type of thing?
What I would often be doing would be, I would have, okay, so if it was a speech where where there was a written text, which is not always the case. In some cases, for lower key, for less significant things, it would be, say, a conversation and some talking points and some things like that, but let's say for a speech that was actually delivered, that is a speech that was written out and then delivered, behind a podium, I would almost always have the actual physical text of the speech, and I would mark up that physical text of it. So in some cases, because it was helpful for me in terms of just relating to my own boss, let's say that he skipped a paragraph. I'm like, I wonder why he skipped that paragraph. Maybe ask him about that, or maybe I could even figure out why he skipped that. He didn't even bother reading a paragraph, or he skipped a line, or he ad-libbed a new version of the line. That was actually very helpful to me in terms of just dealing with my boss. Because again, what you're trying to do in writing a speech for somebody else is that you're trying to make that person sound like the best version of him or herself. And so it could be that the way I phrased something didn't sound like him, but he knew what I meant, and he was able to phrase it in his own words, and that actually was helpful for me in terms of doing the tactical craft of my job. But so I would have the text with me, and let's say there was a joke, I would say, basically it would look like seriously, like plus and minus, and say, hey, that joke worked, that joke didn't work, that line worked, that line didn't work. And one of the things that it taught me is that you don't go based on, I'm getting in the weeds here a little bit, but you don't make permanent decisions based on one reaction. And I do that myself now in my own stuff. So if I say something and it doesn't work the first time, I don't abandon it then. I make a note of that, and then I try it again, because sometimes different audiences, different contexts, different things, it can work. But I would do that. It was just sort of, and here's the thing. I don't want to make this sound like I use the word forensic to talk about what Koppelman is doing. Mine was less forensic. It was more hygienic. It was, to me, it's like, that's just like good staff hygiene. You know what I mean? I wrote a speech, and this dude is delivering it. I should pay attention to like how it's going, Definitely. And if I do that, I'm going to do better next time, and he's going to do better next time.
If I look at my own writing, the writing that I've done that has received the best response, we'll just keep it broad, 9 times out of 10, it's something that I have tested and honed in some speaking format, whether it's a presentation or a class or something else, which is part of the reason why if I'm giving a talk or doing an interview in front of a live audience, I always ask them to raise the house lights, because for whatever reason, a lot of venues like to really dim it down, but then you can't see the response. So I always ask them to raise the house lights. When you are testing out a speech or an article or a chapter on someone else, what are you looking for, or what types of questions do you ask? You can pick any of those that you'd like, but what type of questions do you ask?
Yeah. Let me take your simple question and complicate it.
Let's go for
it. Because I actually think that speeches and written words are different things.
Okay.
And so the way that I would convey an idea in a speech is going to be different from the way that I would convey the same idea in a book. So for me, like one of the most important, I have to say it's a simple question, but and I find myself asking it all the time to people, is this following question: does that make sense? Does that make sense? Or what I've sometimes found an easier way to rephrase that is, I think this is actually useful. A writing hack is, what about that doesn't make sense?
Yes, that's a great question.
I think that people are more likely to say, does that make sense? They're, sort of out of politeness, and also just out of self. Oh, of course that makes sense. Yeah. But sort of, what about that? So I converted a little bit. What about that what about that doesn't make sense? When you explain an idea to somebody or you're talking to an audience, I really think, I mean, maybe I'm overestimating my own abilities, but I really think you can tell by the looks on people's faces. There are all other kinds of markers of that too. So, for instance, especially now, if you have slides, what are people taking pictures of? All right, what slides are they taking pictures of? What things are they writing down? So I look at those kinds of cues in talks. I think writing is more difficult, and I'll tell you what I do in writing, especially books. And this is a little bit insane, it's insane in the sense that it requires someone who is deeply devoted to you in a way that someone you truly love is devoted to you. So here's the thing about my books. Even though I just said speeches and written words are different, for me, I actually improve my writing by listening to it. Not because I listen to written words different from the way I listen to speeches, if that makes any sense. And so when I write books, so the latest book and all the previous books, I have an office here behind my house in Washington, D.C. It's a garage, refurbished garage. And I will sit in my office and let's talk about the latest book, okay, just to give you an idea. So this is a book, I don't know, it's like 280 pages or something like that. I read every word of that book out loud to my wife at various stages. What's more, I read multiple drafts of chapters out loud to my wife in this office. But wait, there's more. My wife read every word of this book out loud to me, including drafts, because for me, that's how I process the written word. So for me, I can tell what works in a speech because you have a large audience of people behind, reacting to it. When in terms of written words, like I don't know, it's just like, after all these years, I know what's good and what's not when it comes to the written word. And I actually know what's not good, really, is what I know. And so I try to remove all the not good stuff. And the way I do that in this very laborious way is to read aloud, because that helps me look at the words a different way, but also to have them read aloud to me. Now, what's amazing to this and shows you just how incredible and awesome my wife is that I am the worst person on the planet to be read aloud to, because I'm a complete pain in the ass when it comes to, especially if you're reading my words. Oh, come on, you got to read with more expression than that. Oh, come on, no, the emphasis is on that word. No. Yet my saintly wife has done this for several books now.
Wow, she's a keeper.
Yeah.
I've only, and I suspect this is more common than either of us might expect, but John McPhee, the nonfiction writer, also writes, I think he still writes for the New Yorker. Fascinating guy, but I took a seminar with him in undergrad, and he also explained how he reads all of his work. I believe he reads not only his feature works, but his articles out loud to his wife.
Really? Yep. I actually did not know that.
Yep. So this is
So I'm in pretty good. I'm in pretty good company.
You're in good company.
I started reading John McPhee when I was like a pretty, like a young teenager. And one of the best McPhee books I've read was a book, you might have read it, called Levels of the Game.
It's so good. It's so good. Maybe you can just.
I love that book. I read it again. I actually read it again about 2 years ago. But I read it as a kid. I got it out of the library. I spent a lot of time in libraries when I was a kid, and I don't know how some librarian or somebody told me about it, because he has that famous book about Bill Bradley, A Sense of Where You Are. So I read that because I was a basketball fan. And then it's like, oh, I was also a tennis fan. It's like, oh, you read about tennis too? And I read that book. And I didn't, at the time, I guess I was saying, wow, you can actually write about sports in a way that's kind of more interesting than just sports. Yeah. That's a remarkable book. I mean, I can explain it quick. So it's a story about a single tennis match between Arthur Ashe who then was very young, just out of Richmond, and a guy named Clark Graebner, who was from a wealthier family in, I think it was like suburban Cleveland. And what he does is he basically describes the match, but throughout he pulls back and tells each of their stories of how they actually got to the court that day. I think it was a U.S. Open match. And so he actually describes them playing a point, and then he pulls back and talks about how Arthur Ashe got there, and he pulls back and talks about how Clark Graebner got there. And he does it with such elegance and such concision. It's just it's a joy to behold.
It's truly spectacular. And for those who haven't read McPhee, you should, if not for any other reason, that he can take any subject matter you can imagine and make a riveting book about said subject. It could be oranges, Plymouth Rock.
Yeah, well, the Oranges book is great. I read that when I was a kid too.
Hand-carved canoes, geology. Yeah. You name the topic, and he can turn it into a page turner. But levels of the game is just spectacular. And one thing that McPhee is very, very good at is, and I think this is also shared territory with you, is asking questions. Given the nature of his writing, a very significant portion of his time is spent interviewing. And what about that doesn't make sense is a really powerful tweak on the maybe alternative that you mentioned, which is, does this make sense, right? Or does this make sense or not? And this may be digging too far into the weeds, but I was really fascinated to read about an approach that you've detailed in one of your books called motivational interviewing. And I hadn't heard of this before, but the example that stuck out to me, and you don't have to give this exact example, but was asking a student who is seemingly struggling with algebra a certain question instead of others. I don't want to butcher it, but I can certainly also, I have it in front of me so I can pull it up if need be. But can you explain for people what motivational interviewing is and maybe give an example?
Yeah, so this is actually it's a therapeutic technique that actually I think has wider applications. And I heard about it from a fellow named Mike Pentalon, who's at Yale School of Medicine, who used it in I think addiction treatment. And it's basically like this. So let's say that you have let me think of a good example here of something that somebody typically isn't that keen to do. Let's go to algebra. Let's say you have somebody. Let's say you're a parent and you have a kid who's in 8th grade, and he has an algebra test and doesn't want to study for the algebra test. Isn't into it, doesn't want to do it. And so, a typical reaction from parents, from anybody, an authority figure, is like, "What the hell is wrong?" Start saying, start demanding compliance. And motivational interviewing is almost the reverse of that. So it basically, let's say you have a kid named Bob. You could say, "Hey Bob, I see you're not studying for your algebra test. Let me ask you a question. I see you have an algebra test tomorrow. On a scale of 1 to 10, how ready are you to study for your algebra test? How ready are you to start studying for your algebra test? All right. How much do you want to start studying for your algebra test?" And Bob is totally unmotivated by it. Bob might say, "I'm a 3, right? A 3 out of 10. Now, again, our reaction as bosses, as parents, as people in figures of authority is to say, "What do you mean you're a 3? You should be a 9." But instead, you're more chill than that, and you say, "Okay, you're a 3. Why didn't you pick a lower number?" And that always wakes people out. So he says, "I'm a 3 out of 10 in terms of my desire to do this thing." And you say, instead of saying, "Yo, my God, you should be a 9. What are you, crazy? You lazy ass?" You say, "Oh, why didn't you pick a lower number?" And what's interesting about that is what it does to Bob is that Bob has to now say why he's not a 2. And so he begins saying things like, "Well, if I don't study for this test, I'm probably going to bomb the next test. If I don't master this material, it's going to be harder to go into later on. If I don't do well in this test, you might hassle me." And so what happens is that Bob begins articulating his own autonomous, intrinsically motivated reasons for doing something. And that's the key. And what we know from a mountain of social science research is that when people have their own reasons for doing something, they're more likely to endorse the behavior and they're more likely to carry it out. And so this becomes a way to surface Bob's own motivation for it through questions rather than through dictates. And it can be a very, very powerful technique. You can also turn it inward. You say, well, how ready are you, Dan, to finish this chapter? Oh God, I'm like a 3. Then you say, well, Dan, why aren't you a 2? Oh, and so anything you can do to help people surface their own reasons for doing something makes them more likely to commit to the behavior, more likely to follow through on the behavior.
That last extension is really important. I had been prepping this and reading the background, some of it, and it didn't even occur to me that you could apply it to yourself and use it for journaling or something like that to uncover or maybe rediscover the motivation that drove you to start it in the first place, even though you lost sight of it or it petered out or whatever the hell it might be.
Yeah. I mean, you could use it for going to, you could use it for going to the, going to the gym or going to work out. How ready are you? How excited are you about, how motivated are you to work out right now? I'm a 2. All right. Well, I said it to myself. Well, why aren't you a 1? Well, I know that probably I'll feel better if I work out rather than if I don't work out. I know that actually, if I don't do this aerobic exercise today, I'm probably going to, might not have a chance to do it tomorrow, which means I'm going to feel like crap. And so you can turn it on yourself as well. It's all about those surfacing, one of the things that we've done in management and parenting and all other realms of life is that we've overdosed on control. And control is not an effective way to motivate people for important things, because human beings only have 2 responses to control. They comply or they defy. And that's a history of humankind. It's basically human beings either complying or defying with control. And so we need to abandon control as a motivator and look for ways for people to summon their own autonomous motivation for doing things.
So we talked at the very top of this interview about Johnny Bunko and how you were ahead of the voters in a sense. It didn't quite catch. You might have been a bit early with the manga format. In contrast, A Whole New Mind seems to really have resonated strongly, and it did catch. So I'd love to try to deconstruct why that was the case. And as one example, it appealed so much to Oprah Winfrey that she gifted, I want to say, 4,500 copies to the Stanford graduating class of 2008 when she did her commencement speech there. Why do you think that is? And the subtitle, I should just mention, so Whole New Mind subtitle, Why Right-Brainers Will Rule the Future. Why did this one take?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. I think a reason that it took is that it was a fairly original idea, conveyed in a way that was easy to understand and also had the advantage of probably being more right than wrong. So the idea in that book is the following, that I was arguing then, I still believe it today, that the structure of our brain offers a metaphor for describing the future of work. And, all your listeners know there's been a lot of stuff written about left brain and right brain over the years. Most of it's just total garbage. But one of what we know about our brains is that they're actually somewhat efficient. And then over time, they've divided up tasks. So the left hemisphere specializes in one set of tasks that are logical, linear, sequential, analytical. The right hemisphere specializes in a different set of tasks that are about understanding context, about synthesis, and about simultaneous processing. And so that division of labor in the brain, I think, offers a very powerful metaphor for understanding what I thought was going on in the world of work, and it continues to go on in the world of work. But actually, to make sure I got the underlying science right, tearing a page from the Tim Ferriss playbook, I actually went to the National Institutes of Health to get my own brain scanned, see my own brain in action, which ended up being a profoundly disappointing experience. But that's another story for another day. And so basically, the idea here is this: that the abilities that used to be the most valuable in the economy, it's a metaphor, characteristic of the left hemisphere, logical, linear, sequential, analytical, spreadsheet, SAT abilities, those abilities are still necessary, but they're no longer sufficient. And its ability is more characteristic of the right hemisphere of the brain. Artistry, empathy, inventiveness, big picture thinking, those abilities are now the first among equals. And the reason for that is a very hard-headed reason, that those kinds of abilities are easy to outsource, easy to automate, and that the left hemisphere abilities, the SAT spreadsheet abilities, are easy to outsource, easy to automate, and less valuable in iterating something new, in dealing with the demands for new that comes from an abundant world. And so actually, maybe another reason that took is that I basically came to a soft-hearted conclusion in a hard-headed way. There was a very clear economic argument for that. The 3 A's: Asia, automation, abundance. Reductive left brain work can be done cheaper overseas. The other A, automation. It can be done faster by computers and now smart machines. And then finally, abundance, that our material needs have been satisfied and oversatisfied, that there's a premium now in coming up with something utterly new and giving the world something it didn't know it was missing, which is a very much of an artistic ability. And so that's the argument in that book. And it's an argument I think that people resonated to because they were seeing inklings in their own life and they needed a way to describe it, categorize it, put words on it.
Well, it seems like history has proven your prediction or description very accurate at this point, for sure. And it also it also occurs to me that this is another place, manga aside, where you and Kevin Kelly, the founding editor of Wired Magazine, are very much on the same page. You mentioned something in passing, though, that I can't let go because I have to hear the separate story. Why was your brain scan disappointing?
Because I looked at my brain. I was thinking my brain would be special, some kind. It looked like every other brain I'd seen. Like I couldn't pick my own brain out of a lineup. So that's what it was. I mean, it's sort of, I shouldn't say disappointing. It's humbling, like the idea that I got this brain in my head. All right. And, leaving aside the thorny issue of where does the brain end and the mind begin, or vice versa. My brain is largely responsible for who I am. And yet when I see a picture of it, it's completely unremarkable and looks like every other brain that's being scanned that day. There's something kind of weird and humbling about that. Disappointing too. I don't know. I was expecting my brain would be cooler or something like that.
Looking back at all of your books, do you find any commonalities or patterns? And I mean, we can also forge all sorts of spurious correlations. Yeah. But looking at the books that seem to have struck a nerve and those that, for whatever reason, didn't perform up to your hopes.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I think that when it comes to actual performance of things, like how well a book does, that's something that's not fully, I mean, you know this. I mean, sure. Anybody knows this. That's not something that's fully in our control. Absolutely. And I'm actually more or less okay on that. I mean, it's disappointing when something doesn't do as well as you want, but to me, my criterion is, did I write the best book I possibly could write? And then once you put it out there, there's so many other variables. You just don't know whether it's going to take or whether it's not going to take. So, I mean, I wrote a book, my very first book was a book called Free Agent Nation. That was not a monumental, that did okay, but it was not a monumental hit. It should have been because I think I was right. But for whatever reason, I think it came out, I think it just came out at the wrong time. It should have come out slightly earlier. And so on that, so to me, how well a book does, there's so much randomness in that. I try not to lose any sleep over it. In terms of actual, is there a through line among all the books? That's an interesting question. And I can say from the creation point of view, there's absolutely not a through line. There is no intentional through line through these kinds of books. It's not as if I have mapped out somewhere on a whiteboard here in Pink Ink World Headquarters in Washington, D.C., this grand scheme to create the pink oeuvre in a certain fashion and a certain timetable with certain things covered like that. Far from it. I just go from one thing to another. I just like figure out what I'm going to do next. And as you know, Tim, I mean, writing a book is so difficult. It's so hard. It's so time consuming that if you're not in love with the idea, if you don't love working on it, it's going to be miserable for you. So I just pick the next topic based on what I'm really interested in and what I want to spend a couple of years, a few years working on. So I think it's possible that people can detect a through line, that readers could detect a through line. Maybe they're seeing something that I'm not. But if there's a through line, it's visible only retrospectively. It's not something that was intentional.
What was, speaking of difficulty and writing process, what if there is if you had to pick one, what has been the most difficult book for you to write and why?
I think it was the last one, the last book that I wrote. Believe it or not, you would think it would get easier over time, but it didn't. So this last book, When, about the science of timing, that was the most difficult book to write. Partly because I went into that book I started writing A Whole New Mind, having done some research and saying, hey, I think there's something going on here. Like, I think we're moving to this world, and sort of I had a theory of the case. With Drive, I had a book about motivation. I had looked at a lot of the research in motivation. I said, well, wait a second. People are missing like a huge story here. With When, I went in totally with questions rather than with any kind of theory of the case. I basically said, hey, I'm making all kinds of timing decisions in my own life. I'm making them in a totally half-assed way. I'd like to make them in a better way. Could somebody please give me some guidance? And I started looking around for guidance, and it didn't exist. And then I started looking at the research, and I realized that across all of these domains of research, literally dozens and dozens, from the hard sciences of molecular biology to endocrinology to the social sciences of economics and social psychology, to many, many domains, these scholars are asking very, very similar questions. What's the effect of time of day on what we do and how we do it? How do beginnings affect us? How do midpoints affect us? How do endings affect us? And so I went in saying, wow, how do I make better timing decisions myself? But I didn't have a theory of the case. And so the volume of research for this one was so monumental. There were so many studies out there, and there were so many different fields, and fields that, like, molecular biology is not a subject that is at my fingertips. All right. I spent so much time. I basically would read those papers. I would read them through, and I would write down all the words that I didn't know the meaning of. And then I would look up those words, and then I would read it again, and I would read it a third time. And so it's very painstaking. And then also because I didn't have a theory of the case, I just had questions rather than even a kind of skeleton or a shape of what I wanted to write. I had to figure that out. So I probably did, 17, 18 different outlines of that book. So that was you would think it would get easier, but it actually got hard. It actually got harder.
18 outlines. What would such an outline look like? How long is it? What's the format?
The outline. When I say an outline, it's relatively short, just like 1 or 2 pages. Nothing too comprehensive. I guess outline is well, it's partly the right word, because I'm a firm believer when it comes to speeches and when it comes to books. I'm a firm believer in structure and shape. I think that those are what makes some things work. I think it's true for television shows. I think it's true for podcasts. I think that structure. I think that structure and shape are very important. All right. No. So here's the thing, Tim. I think your podcasts, they don't necessarily have a structure, but they have a shape. There's no question they have a shape. All right. And so it's a difference between, you can have sculptures, beautiful sculptures that have right angles, and you can have other beautiful sculptures like a Henry Moore sculpture that has no right angles at all, but it has a distinct and memorable and identifiable shape. Right. But I'm a big believer in structure and shape. And so what I'm doing there is that's basically just my search for how do you organize the ideas and what's the shape or the structure of the final product going to be? Because once I see the shape, I can do a lot better work. But for this other, it's like I'm reading through 700 studies on all this kinds of stuff. And I'm like, good God, how do I even make sense of this? What do I put where? I started thinking about organizing it. Do I organize this book about timing? Do I organize it basically the way that we organize time? So do I write about, the hour, the day, the week, the month, the year, the lifetime? And that's a really bad way to do it. But I ended up.
Why is that bad? How did you decide that was a bad approach?
Because for a couple of reasons. Number one, the material didn't organize itself cleanly in that way. Number two, that struck me more as like a handbook, like a farmer's almanac, rather than an intelligent book of science journalism with takeaways. And more important, that's not a book I would want to read. Right. And so I abandoned that, but did I really abandon it? Because I actually ended up writing a whole chapter in this book about the day. So I ended up cleaving off some of that and keeping it for other things. And so it took me a long time to find the shape. And the way I find the shape is I basically write it down on either what I call big ass stickies, is giant Post-it notes, or on a whiteboard that I have in my office. But I went through many, many, many iterations. And on that, I have a somewhat social view of that. And that what I'll do is I'll run it past people to see what they think. And say, hey, what do you think if I organize the book that way? Does that make any sense? Or what about that doesn't make sense? Or what am I missing here? Or what's the weak spot there? But it took me a long time to find the shape of this book. That, coupled with the fact that the amount of research was so massive, it was actually the hardest book I've had to write.
Well, you're doing the research as you're writing the book, right? In effect, it sounds like, because you're coming into it with questions, but then you're having to digest all of the information that might lead or might not lead to answers while you're writing it. Yeah, exactly. Very hard.
And that's hard to right. Exactly. You're so right about that. That's hard to do too. And a lot of people, I mean, as a writer, it's messier than that. There's this notion that I'm going to do my research, and then when my research is done, I'm going to do my writing. All right.
Yeah.
And so it never works that way. But when you have more questions and when you don't know the shape yet and you still have a lot of questions, what happens is, I'm going to do the research. Now I'm going to try to write down something about it. Crap. You know what? Now that I write it, I realize I'm missing a whole thing here, and I got to do more research. So let me go back and do that. So it's less of this kind of, happy march from, happy jump from I'm going to go from this lily pad to that lily pad and happily jump from each one to another like a delighted frog.
There's a lot of task switching. That's exactly why the 4-Hour Chef for me was also by far the most difficult book, among other reasons, to write, is that I came into it intending to try all of these experiments, ask all of these questions, and write the book somewhat chronologically as I'm getting answers. Oh. And that was a very punishing way to approach things. But to look at the content, so going past the structure and looking at the content and the findings of when, I was looking at an NPR interview that you did and teasing out some potential ways that I could apply the content from this book into my own life. And I'm going to read a quote. You can feel free to correct it, but this is what I have as one very clear example. And I'd love to, basically, I'm going to ask you what types of decisions have changed for you, or easy ways that people can think about making changes related to timing. So here's one, and I'm going to truncate it a little bit, but quote, in a lot of this research in big data, you see systematically poor performance in healthcare settings in the afternoon. Example, the incidence of hand washing inside of hospitals dramatically drops in the afternoon. And that seems like a bad thing to me. That's my voice, not yours. You look at colonoscopies. Endoscopists find half as many polyps in colonoscopies in afternoon exams versus morning exams, even with the same population. Doctors are more likely to prescribe unnecessary antibiotics in the afternoon compared to the morning. And this is very, very actionable, right? If we are to trust the data, if the patterns, if the correlations hold, then you are certainly better off, it would seem, if you want to risk I'm not sure that was English. Risk mitigate. I think I swapped the first two letters. That has a fancy psychological term.
It's called in linguistics a tip of the slung.
A tip of the slung.
Yeah.
Exactly. And we might come back to your undergrad and linguistics, but what are other examples related to the timing?
Oh my God,
that people might be able to implement.
Oh my gosh, there's so much stuff. I mean, the good news about this is that when I did finally wrestle the research to the ground and figure out how to structure it, it yielded so many great takeaways for readers. So take a step back. What we know from a mountain of research, it took me a while to figure this out, was that we tend to move through the day in 3 stages: a peak, a trough, a recovery. Peak, trough, recovery. Now, most of us move through the day in that order. People who are night owls, people who have an evening chronotype, they move through the day in the reverse order: recovery, trough, peak. But what we know is that we know a few things about human performance over the course of a day. The most important thing, and I wish somebody had told me this before I was 50 rather than once I was 50, all right, is that our cognitive abilities do not remain the same throughout the day. Our cognitive abilities change during the day, and they can change in some dramatic ways, and they change in predictable ways. But how we perform depends on what we're doing, right? So what we know about the peak, which again, for most of us is the morning. For night owls, it's later in the day. What we know about the peak is that the peak is when we are most vigilant. And what does vigilance mean? Vigilance means we're able to bat away distractions. And so when we're vigilant and can bat away distractions, that makes it the best time for analytic work that requires heads down, focus, writing a report, analyzing data, that kind of work. That piles of research tell us that we should be doing our analytic work during the peak, right? The trough, that's the early afternoon and early to mid-afternoon. As you mentioned from the data on healthcare, a lot of bad stuff happens then. I mean, you have standardized test scores for students go down in the afternoon. You have, if you look at auto accidents, once you control for cars on the road, obviously there are going to be more accidents when there are more cars on the road, but once you control for that, the most dangerous time to drive is 4 to 6 a.m. The second most dangerous time is 2 to 4 p.m. During that midday trough, we should be doing more of our administrative work. We should be answering our routine emails. You've talked in the past, Tim, about batching. We should be batching our routine emails and answering them during the trough. We should be filling out our TPS report. We should be filling out our expense report, whatever. That kind of stuff that we have to do during the course of a day that doesn't require a lot of major cognitive power. Now, the recovery period, again, because this peak trough recovery is a pattern of mood that also is a pattern of performance. The recovery period is actually really, really interesting. During the recovery period, we have elevated mood. Our mood is better than during the trough, but we're less vigilant than during the peak. And so it's really important to think about that combo platter here. That is, you have higher mood, but less vigilance. That makes it a good time for things like brainstorming, for things like insight work, where if you're too locked down and focused, you're not going to be that creative. And so that degree of looseness coupled with the elevated mood makes that recovery stage better for what are called insight problems, brainstorming, things that require iteration. And so what we see is that if we recognize that our cognitive abilities don't stay the same over the course of a day, that they change in predictable ways, and that when we do something depends on what we're doing, we should be moving our analytic work to the peak, our administrative work to the trough, and our insight and creative work to the recovery. And it's that simple. And what the research tells us also is this. Is that time of day explains about 20% of the variance in how people perform on cognitive tasks. So if you think about that, that's a big deal. Like, we can explain if we have two people, Maria and Sally, and they perform differently on cognitive tasks, how do we explain that? All right. We say, how do we explain that variance in how people perform, Maria, Sally, and 18,000 other people perform on cognitive tasks? We say, some people are smarter than other people. Some people are more conscientious than other people. Some people have more social advantage than other people. But what the research is telling us is that 20% of that variance is time of day.
Right.
And so what we should be doing is, and what we're not doing is, we should be making our when decisions in a strategic way rather than in the lazy, haphazard way with which we tend to make our when decisions. And you see this most glaringly, and this is my rant of the year, is you see this most glaringly with meetings in organizations. When we schedule meetings in organizations, the only criterion we use is availability. That's it. Who's available? We don't say, what kind of meeting is this? Is this a meeting where people have to be analytical? What kind of meeting is this? Is this about travel voucher policies? What kind of meeting is this? Are we brainstorming? Who's going to be there? Are they going to be morning people? Are they going to be intermediate people? Are they going to be evening people? We don't even ask those questions. We just say, who's available? And it's causing it's one of the easiest things organizationally to fix, and it's something that at the unit of one, individuals can be a lot more systematic and intentional about moving the right work into the right time slots.
What time of day do you generally wake up, personally?
I wake up a little after 7.
And what is the first 2 hours of your day look like? Do you have any particular routines? Can you walk us through what that?
I don't have the detailed routines that you have written about, that you actually have experimented with, and things like journaling and meditation or anything like that. Here's what I do. I wake up. All right. I take a shower. A shower helps me wake up, so I take a shower. I go downstairs, and I feel better if I see a member of my family. So whoever happens to be awake. I have 2 kids in college now, so I don't see them, but I have another kid who's still around. So I see him. I see my wife, and I like to have some protein for breakfast, if that's a ritual, and caffeine. Protein and caffeine is my preferred breakfast.
What's your go-to protein?
You know what? I probably eat more hard-boiled eggs than almost any other person in America. I am keeping the hard-boiled egg industry in business. I think I'm single-handedly responsible for the advent of hard-boiled eggs for sale in individually wrapped packages in airports. I really think so. Because once they introduced that, I bought them all. And they go, oh my God, there's such demand for these hard-boiled eggs. I was actually saying to my wife, I eat so many eggs, it's ridiculous. So I don't have a cholesterol problem, fortunately. Hard-boiled eggs or peanut butter. And then what I do is, when I'm in my writing day, and this is actually something I did better having read this book, when I'm on writing days, I will go to my office, which again is behind my house, and I will not bring my phone with me. I will not turn on my email, and I will give myself a quota. And that quota is usually a word count. So call it 700 words. I'm a fairly slow writer. So you got these people out there who are like, I can write 3,000 words a day. And it's like, I don't think I've ever done that. And so
I'm very, very slow. I may be slower than you are even.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. I'm slow in I'm basically slow in every domain of my life. I'm like just I'm a slow runner. I'm a slow reader. I'm a slow writer. I really heavily scrutinize my 23andMe report to see if I had some kind of like tortoise gene in me somewhere, that somehow like one of my ancestors in Latvia somehow mated with a tortoise at some point. But what I will do though is I will come in and give myself that quota, and I won't do anything until I hit that number. And then I'm free to do other kinds of things. And then what I'll do is I'll have lunch, and then I will, I have done a good job, especially after like this book changed the way that I organize my day, because I do my analytic work better in the morning. So this book impelled me to clear out my mornings to do that analytic work, which for me is writing. I stuff the administrative stuff off into the midday, and the batched emails and that kind of garbage. And then I like to do interviews, especially when I'm interviewing, like for book interviews. I like to do those later in the day, because I'm a little bit more, I like the interviews to be a little bit more freewheeling. I'm not an investigative reporter. I'm not conducting a deposition. I just, want to hear people's stories and what they think about stuff. And so
you're not quoting the Yale Law and Policy Review, Volume 8, Number 2, 1990?
No. And so I'm not, so I want that to be a little bit more iterative. And then and then I actually end up exercising later. I end up exercising later in the day and in the early evening because I find that works best for me.
You said on a writing day, when you were on book deadline, what does your weekly structure tend to look like? Is every day a writing day? How do you
when I'm writing
things?
a book, because I'm also a momentum player. So for me, writing every day is hugely important. When I'm working on a book or working on a long article. So I try to do that. I try to do that every single day, like 7 days a week.
And do you have set periods of time between books? Do you decide in advance, I'm going to take X period of time until I investigate another book? What does your macro planning look like?
Macro planning, boy. My macro planning is neither macro nor planned, I think. So
that I think that needs to be on a motivational calendar somewhere.
Yeah. I don't know. It's
put it another way. If that question sucks, which it might, because it's also making a bunch of assumptions. How do you decide when to take on new projects or new books? If that's a better question.
Yeah. So I sort of go in cycles. So I'm actually heading to that cycle right now. So I've spent a lot of time writing this book and try to make it as good a book as I can. In terms of actually spreading the word about it, I try to do that with, forgive the cliche, not leaving anything on the sidelines. So doing everything I possibly can, being everywhere, being strategic about it all, trying new stuff, trying cool stuff, trying to get some momentum behind the book. And then, when that sort of white hot center dissipates, and the book, we hope, has some momentum of its own, then I'll go back and figure out the next project, whatever that project might be. And the way I do that is, I know this will shock you, Tim, in a slow, laborious way. So what I do is I'll give you my mechanisms here. So believe it or not, I use a lot of paper folders and I have a labeler. I use paper folders and a labeler to label my folders. Cause I was like a getting things done guy before getting things done was cool. I met David Allen like in 1997. And I bought a labeler like shortly after that.
I was going to ask if he's sending you your customary 5% royalties for your the brain power. You're like the guy who invented rollerblades or the gal 40 years before they became cool.
Oh yeah, no. I'm a GTD devotee. I'm not hardcore. I'm not like orthodox, but I'm not reform. I'm not reform either. I'm sort of like in the middle. And so anyway, I have these paper files with labels. And so when I read stuff or make notes to myself, I throw stuff in those files. I use Evernote and I also use Dropbox. And I just throw ideas in there. And then what I do is every 6 months or so, I go through those ideas of like, hey, this would be a cool television show to do. Hey, this would be a cool article to write. Hey, this would be a cool book to write. And as I look at those ideas, maybe revisiting them every 6 months or so, I realize that most of them are just god-awful ideas. One of my beliefs about the human brain or creativity is that in order to have good ideas, you have to have a lot of ideas. And so I have a lot of bad ideas, which I think is the only way for me to surface any decent ideas. So I'll revisit those ideas, and then when it comes, and I'll cull. And what often happens when I cull is that a few ideas end up just staying there over and over again every 6 month cycle. And then when I get to this point now, I will go back to all of those files and look more carefully and say, hey, I sort of have in my mind's eye right now 3 possible projects. And so I'll more heavily vet those projects, read a lot more, talk to people, bounce ideas off of people. And I like bouncing ideas off of people, about which more in a moment. And then when it comes time to write a book, I will actually write a book proposal, even if I have the deal already done. So I have a 2-book deal, like I have to write another book, but I'll still write a proposal for this next book, maybe 40-page proposal, which allows me to figure out, is there a there? Is this something I really want to work on? I think a lot of things sound really good when you're just shooting the breeze. they sound less good if you have to say, can I explain this? Can I explain this idea? Who's going to buy it? Why it's cool? Why it's original? Why no one else is doing it? Can I explain that in a coherent written document? That's a tougher order. And so not everything lends itself to that. And I will bounce ideas out of people. So actually it's funny. You mentioned Kevin at the beginning of the show. I had this one idea where I went out and I made the pilgrimage to, what do you call his town? Pacifica. And made the pilgrimage to Kevin's house and said, I got an idea I want to run past you for a book. And Kevin was one of the people who said, that's not a very good idea. And and unfortunately, he was not the only one who said that. And
or fortunately, depending on how you look at it. I mean, if he's
actually, fortunately, you're right. Fortunately, he was not the only one who said that. So I actually ended up abandoning that idea in part because he was another brick in the wall of people saying no, no, no.
Let's pause there for a quick second. Do you mind sharing? I don't think Kevin would care at all on what he or other people made as arguments against you pursuing this idea. And you can tell us what the idea was, or you can blur
I'm gonna be skittish about the idea, but let's just say it had to do with morality. All right, I wanted to write a book dealing with morality, and Kevin, who is a person of religious faith, who is extraordinarily well read, and among people who are very well read and very intelligent, I think there are a dearth of people who have strong religious faith. It's just an observation. It's not like a judgment one way or the other.
Right.
And so I thought he would be an especially good person to run this idea past. And I guess he and others, the theory of the case that I had, he and others had two criticisms of it, and they are not insignificant criticisms, Tim. The first criticism was, you're wrong. Okay. All right.
To begin with.
Yes, you're wrong. All right. And the second criticism was, you're right, but it's not interesting. So those are two pretty, those are significant critiques.
Right.
So that's generally how I do things. When I came up with this idea for when, it was an idea that was kicking around there, and one of the ways that I knew it was a good idea were two things. Number one is that when I was writing the proposal, first of all, I was looking at the research, and I found myself wanting to do more research, which is always a good sign. It's like, holy crap, is that true? Well, what about Bobbity Ba? And I go look at Bobbity Ba. Oh my God, Bobbity Ba says, and so I found myself wanting to do more research. That was one thing. And then when I started writing the proposal for that, it was like, for me, it doesn't happen very often, but there were portions of it that were just like butter. I could just explain it so clearly, like, here's what I'm going to try to find out, and here's why it matters. And it was like that, that scene in Jerry Maguire where he sort of writes all night and,
I'm taking the goldfish minus the goldfish.
I was doing handstands against the wall and everything like that. So that's sometimes a good sign.
I think it's that lack of or overabundance of energy, I think, is undervalued. How much the project actually gives you more fuel in the tank.
Right. And I think that's a big, here's the thing. I think a lot of writers, a lot of people who come out as journalists, and before I started writing books, post speech writing sort of as a, and even the first time I was writing books, I did a lot of magazine articles, a lot of magazine writing, long form magazine writing, which I like. And I found a lot of journalists who would write an article, the article would do well, and they would get a book offer, and they would not properly vet it about whether they want to, because there are a lot of ideas that you maybe want to go out on a few dates with, but there are very few ideas that you want to go steady with, let alone marry and have kids. And I think that books are basically you're marrying and having kids.
Yeah.
And that's a very, very, very high bar.
There are a lot of great articles that should stay articles and make very mediocre books. And be potentially, I suppose not vice versa. It's very rare that you go in the opposite direction. But
That's it's so. I mean, it's so off. I read. I want to say the name of it. I read one of those. Send it for me a blurb. I read one of those this weekend where somebody had an article. It did really well. They got a book deal. They turned it into a book, and it's like, okay, you know what? This thing has so much more impact as an article rather than as a book.
So I want to dig in a little bit on this tickler file that you review every 6 months.
Yeah.
Because one of the most frequent questions I am asked is, how do you pick projects? How do you vet projects? And you mentioned revisiting every 6 months. So a few mundane questions. Within Evernote, do you have a specific notebook that is tickler file or something like that? How do you keep track of all of these ideas?
I can actually look that up right now. What I do is I categorize them. So what I have is I have a giant file called MISC. All right. Of just like shards. Okay. But then I'll go through that and say, wait a second. Let me think of an example here. Wait a second. I'm collecting a lot of articles about, here's a book I'm not going to, it could be interesting. At one point, it's like, God, somebody should write a book about courage. All right. Like, what about courage? What do we know about courage? All right. I'm not going to do that. If one of your listeners wants to go out and do it, God bless you. I think it could be really interesting. So I could go into the MISC file and say, the MISC notebook, I guess it's called, is what do we know about courage? And I'll go into the MISC notebook and I say, wow, I got a lot of articles about courage. That's gonna birth a separate notebook on courage, and then I organize it that way.
Right.
So I'll have notebooks of MISC, and I'll have notebooks of particular ideas that I have that end up being fuller because it's like, oh, this one has stuck around for a little bit longer than others.
And you mentioned during these reviews, you might say, oh, here's a cool idea for this, a cool idea for that. Oh, this could be really interesting. That could be really interesting. I would imagine even after the second glance and noticing that some of these ideas are coyote ugly, and you're like, holy shit, how did I think that was a good idea? Even after removing the flies in the soup, you still have you could drown under the weight of these kind of cool ideas. Right? You have many things that could be interesting. How do you then, what are the parameters or thought processes, questions, anything that help you to get down to the 3 finalists?
Okay. So what do we, it would be, it's really like, what would I want to spend a couple of years on? And so if I really sort of like maybe courage would be an example of that. It's like, I'm sort of interested in that. But it'd be like, I would rather read a good book about courage than write a book about courage. I'm serious. Like that.
Sure.
Like,
that
you know what I mean?
Totally.
And it's like, and so when you go face to face with that and you start saying, do I really want to do this? Then I think your soul at some level tells you, hey, you're into this. You're not so into that. And so that, I think that's the initial cut. But it's also the one reason why so to get to the 3 finalists is actually really kind of intuitive in a way. And there's no magic number to 3. It could be 4, and so, but this is one reason why I will write, book proposals, because it just forces me to reckon with the idea and actually like make it real. And there's this principle that I learned in college. I had a writing course in college. And I actually ended up giving a commencement speech around this idea. I'll spare you that for now. But the idea was following. It was a revelation to me when I was 21 years old. So I had this. So it was this essay writing course, sort of higher level essay writing course. And I had a draft of an essay or something like that. I went into the professor. His name is Charlie Yarnoff. I went to Northwestern. He still teaches at Northwestern. And so Charlie gave me some feedback, and I was like all insistent. Okay, I can fix this. I can move this part over here. Maybe I do another piece over here. Maybe I knew another piece over here. And he's like, no, Dan, that's not your problem here. The problem is that you don't know what you think. that's why this essay sucks. This draft of the essay sucks. You don't know what you think. He didn't say sucks, but that's why this essay stinks. And then he said something to me, and I don't want it to sound glorified or sound like something that is confected where a swell of music will come up behind me and this. But what he said, but it's words I've never forgotten. Truly. He said, sometimes you have to write to figure it out. Sometimes you have to write to figure it out. And that was a revelation to me, because at the time I was in this mode, very kind of traditional schooling mode, where sort of like we were talking about before, you do your research, then you write. You make your outline, then you write. And what he was saying to me is that, the real writers it's more dynamic than that. Sometimes you have to write to figure it out. And that was transformative for me. And so that sort of gave me permission to say, oh, I don't know it. Like, I can change my mind in midway writing something. I can start writing without knowing fully exactly what it is I'm going to say. And to me, that's why I write book proposals, is that I write to figure it out. And a lot of times what I figure out is, this is not a book, or this is not a book I want to write. So I had this one moment, not a few years ago, where a while ago now, actually 10 years ago, even more, where I sent, it was like winter, like second half of December. And I said to my wife and I said, hey, why don't you just take our kids, 3 kids, just go see your parents, just go for a week, right? Or 2 weeks or something like that, go and I got to get a book proposal done. I'm distracted. It's like, when my family leaves, it's like I live like an animal, I mean, I eat
It's
out,
like a raccoon that got into the house.
No, truly. I mean, it is raccoon-like in that I literally eat out of containers, So like my family leaves, I eat out of containers, don't shave, and basically work around the clock except for a few ESPN breaks. That's basically what I do when my family is gone. And so I will, I said, I'm going to write a proposal for this next book. And after about 7 or 8 days, I called Jessica at her parents' house. And I said, hey, I got some good news and some bad news. The good news is that you can come home now. The bad news is that I realized this is not a book. But it was only writing to figure out that allowed me to do that. So I actually wrote, basically 1.5 proposals before writing the when proposal. Because I had a couple ideas, and I said, okay, this is sort of interesting, but let me write to figure it out. And what I realized in 2 very important things. One, it's not a book. Maybe it's an article, or 2, it's not a book that I want to write.
There are a few things, raccoon behavior aside, that I want to follow up on. The first is just to highlight something for people listening, and that is how liberating it is to think about writing as something you do not when you have your ideas ready, but something you do to figure out your ideas.
Absolutely.
Because
when did you learn that?
It's been, I would say, reiterated. It's something that is easy to forget, particularly if you have, or something that you will willfully forget if you have a perfectionist streak and a penchant for procrastination. So if you want to wait until all your ducks are in a row so you can go to the debutante ball pristine and blow everybody's socks off, it's easy to forget this. But the sounds like the cat came back the very next day. I don't know if you know the song, but Kevin Kelly, just to incant his name again.
Yes, indeed.
He emphasized this to me. He's such a prolific writer, and emphasized this to me a number of years ago. And I want to say it goes back probably to McPhee, who is also, much like you, obsessed with structure. And if there's a book, I think it's called Draft Number 4, about
just came out.
It has some really fascinating explorations of this for those people who really want to get into the weeds. He'll also do it graphically. He'll draw out diagrams of what the structure looks like, which appeals to me. But trying to stay on track here, I would say Kevin is the most, well, you are the most recent person, but a number of years ago, Kevin emphasized that to me, and probably before that, McPhee. So it's really liberating, number one, to embrace that, even if you're not fully convinced it's the case. And I also want to give a little bit of context for people who may not be familiar with book proposals. So book proposals in the world of nonfiction books well, I suppose I should take a further step back and say, in the world of nonfiction, so if novels and fiction are totally different. In many cases, you need to finish that puppy before anyone will tell you if your baby is ugly or not, which is has to be terrifying. It must be. In nonfiction, you create a book proposal before you write your book, and the book proposal, and feel free to interject at any point, but the book proposal is in effect a business plan and an overview / executive summary for your book. And there's a lot you find with the best book proposals and the best startup pitches, which take the form of a deck, say a PowerPoint or something like that, very often, they're exceptionally similar. The ingredients that make a good startup pitch and the ingredients that make a good book proposal are very similar. But that is, and I'd love to actually know what the structure of your book proposals look like. I mean, I know what ingredients I would potentially include in a book proposal. What does the table of contents look like for one of your book proposals?
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look. I think they vary a little bit, but they probably have some core design elements. One of them is, and it's questions that I want to ask myself, which is, what is this book? What's it about? Okay, pretty simple question. Why? And this is, I think, the more important question is, why does it fill a need that hasn't been filled yet? Which is basically very similar. I use the same business plan analogy that you do on book proposals, but it's sort of like a business. Like why is it providing why is it filling a need that hasn't otherwise been met? Like basically, if you draw a map of the marketplace, what part of the marketplace of ideas does this cover that hasn't been covered? All right, is it this? So it's and I don't even mean it in. I sometimes will use the high concept. I sometimes will use the high concept pitch of it's X meets Y, which I actually think is actually a very useful heuristic in figuring out ideas. So, for instance, I pitched A Whole New Mind as Future Shock meets 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which I thought was a pretty good pitch. And so,
very common in pitching films, also. Just to highlight, it's really useful.
It's a heuristic, and basically, to me, it says if you think about a map of the territory, if you think about a map of ideas out there, why is no one over here on this part of the map? All right, or show me where on the map your idea is. All right, and let's make sure that someone hasn't gotten there first, and then tell me why someone hasn't gotten there first. What are they missing? And so, in the case of when, for instance, I say, well, the reason they're missing is timing is an art. But it's actually a science. Oh, okay, got it. That's why no one is there. And so I'll talk about what's it about, where does it fit into the marketplace of ideas, why is it original, and this is also really important. Who is it for? All right, and the big mistake that everybody writing a book, and if there's one takeaway from this conversation for prospective writers out there, it's this. The mistake that writers make, and I think business people make too in their pitches, is when they say, who's it for? Who's the audience? Who's the customer? They always want to say everybody. And it's not. It's never everybody. All right. And what I try to do is I have included a section of who is not going to buy that book. Like I will have
you have a section on who isn't the customer.
Right. Who is not going to buy this book? Because I think that's the only way to think carefully about, because books are not a mass medium, and even media products in general are no longer mass media. They're no longer mass. And it's like, and so I'll have bullets in there saying, who is not going to buy this book? And that helps define the audience too. And also I try to, and that's all that, that's really all that it is. But if you know what the book is about, where it fits into the marketplace of ideas, why it's different from anything else that came before it, and why and who it's for, I think those components are really essential. But that fourth component is, and I say this to writers too, tell me who the book is not for. Tell me who's not going to buy this book. And people have a hard time saying, oh, everybody will buy this book. Somebody pitched to me an idea. Somebody came to me once with an idea of a book about somebody was asking me advice on it. It was a book about. I hope I don't. I think the book might have gotten published. I don't want to reveal the name. It was a book about the history of yoga in America. All right, the history, or maybe the history of yoga. Yeah, I think it was the history of yoga. And it's like, oh, okay, that's cool. So I think a lot of people who do yoga might be interested in that. And she said, well, I think people who don't do yoga are going to be interested in this. And I said, no, they're not. Like, people who don't do yoga don't care about the history of yoga. All right. There are a shitload of people in America who do yoga. Like, that's a pretty good audience right there. But don't tell me you know what I mean? And so, so for me, it's like, like my book. It's like, okay, I know that this book about the science of timing. I know that certain people in my neighborhood in Northwest Washington, D.C., who are of a certain age and read only literary fiction and 700-page biographies of founding fathers, they're not going to read this book. They're not going to read. They might be my neighbors. They're not going to read one of my books. And so I think that's really, really important about who is the book not for.
Well, it's also an indicator of focus and logical / rational thinking in a sense, right? Because if you're, for instance, just to digress for a minute, but if you're in the world of investing, where I spent a long time with early stage startups, 17 years or so, if they say everyone is my customer, there is a very real risk that if you give them X number of dollars, you give them $1 million, that they could be developing Dropbox for, say, early tech adopters in the first wave, and they need to get from 0 to 10,000 users. And if there is a 80% off deal for something like shopping mall circulars or something, that they would jump on that and piss away all their money. And certainly, I think a lot of books fail, and this is true of presentations too, from too much miscellaneous information, not too little. If that makes any sense.
Absolutely, it's a matter of it's really just a matter of focus. And going back to the speech thing, I mean, one of the pieces of advice, to the extent that anybody ever asked me for advice on giving speeches and whatnot, is, and it sounds a little like it sounds like a Zen koan-ish sort of phrase, but basically my point is, say something important rather than say important things. And like, I find a lot of times people say something important rather than say important things. Because I think a lot of times people like to try to stuff within the skin all the things they found out, all the things that they know, and they end up not saying anything important. And so, so that's the reason for doing that. So anyway, you get the idea.
Yeah, no, it is. And there are so many comparable examples. If, for instance, you look for this vetting of ideas by putting together a short synopsis of some type. And there's one example, for instance, and I believe this is true. I've certainly heard it and read about it a few times, and I know a fair number of people who work at Amazon, but they'd have to confirm. But I think Ian McAllister, who used to at least be a general manager at Amazon, talked about this as working backwards. And for new initiatives, the product manager who would be in charge of developing, say, a new product has to write an internal press release which announces the finished product, right? So that and that has to focus on effectively exactly what you said, and I'm quoting here from a Medium piece, but, quote, centered around the customer problem, how current solutions, internal or external, fail, and how the new product will blow away existing solutions. Right? And it's the same thing. It's the same thing. If you can't write that press release, like, how on earth are you going to navigate the decision tree of getting to a product that finds its feet? I mean, it could be very difficult. Not to say you don't iterate, but it's a good filter through which you can at least catch the detritus that shouldn't make it to step 2.
Oh man, I have to say, I am your hallelujah chorus on that press release technique. I've literally done that. I think it's helpful for like nonprofit groups that I'm involved in. So a nonprofit group wants to do a big project. but they're all over the place. They don't know exactly what they want to do. And I literally did this. I said, I'll tell you what, here's what I think the project is. Let me write a press release from 2 years from now. And they'll send it around. And it ended up being, I got the idea from Amazon too. It ended up being it ended up being this thing that was really, really focused. So the blah, 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 group, announced today that it was doing blah, 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 blah. And it's like, and then it even had quotes and things in it. And it ended up being this focal point for the whole organization on what are we actually trying to accomplish here. So I second that emotion there big time.
And just to return to another thing that you said, which I'll paraphrase here as if everyone's your customer, no one's your customer.
Yeah.
Another filter or question that I use or have used, I'm not really in the startup game anymore, but have used a lot with startups because they'll ask me to review, say, a landing page and look at copy and messaging and so on. And before I will review it, because if with no further information, I have to review it based on my pair of eyes and my perspective and my particular problems. I can try to empathize and put myself in other people's shoes, but I have to know whose shoes to put myself in. And so I'll ask them, if you could only have 1,000 people sign up for this, who would they be and why? Like, describe for me, and this isn't a politically correct exercise. Like, what is gender? Race, if that matters, maybe it doesn't. Like, where do they live? What magazines or websites do they read? What is their household income? Like, really get granular about what these people have in common, right? Like, do you want all the readers of People magazine?
Yeah.
Do you want the 2,000 people who attend TED? Do you want something in between? Like, really describe that for me. And only once that's been done can I actually give feedback on modifying any of the features or copy or messaging on a particular page. So it's these principles really transfer to a lot of different areas. Well, let me ask just a handful of additional questions, and then maybe we can do a round two sometime. But we've been talking a lot about the decisions you've made, the routines that you have, and although you're very self-effacing, I mean, someone could look at your bio and be very intimidated and assume that you step up to the plate and hit home runs more often than not. Could you tell us about maybe a specific, if you're open to it, difficult period that you've gone through, or a down period, challenging period, or failure? It could be any of those things. And what you did to get back on your feet, or the decisions you made that helped you then kind of get back on firm ground, if anything comes to mind.
Sure. There are all kinds of things. So, I mean, I hate to keep going back to the law school days, but I did leave law school after my first year, and I hated it so much that I went to India instead. And I traveled around India, which was an incredible life-changing experience because I was a young guy, whatever old I was, like 25, 26 years old. And, at the time, it was a while ago. So at the time, India was even cheaper, well, much, much cheaper than it was. So if you're like a 25-year-old dude traveling on your own with a tiny little bit of money in your pocket, you can make it go very, 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 very far. And so, so at the time, I guess I felt like, because I didn't do very well in my initial foray into law school, I didn't really like it. I was pretty miserable. I felt I had made a terrible decision. And I, at some level, just tried to escape. And the way I got back into it was essentially saying, okay, if I'm going to do this, then I'm going to try to figure out what are the one or two things that I can find valuable in this experience, and just try to power my way through. And I guess that's all that I did to overcome that. But I felt pretty bad about how I didn't do very well. I didn't really like it. I felt I had made a ruinous decision about how my life was going to go. And when I sort of kind of woke up and matured a little bit, I said, okay, some people bad things actually happen to people. And I think going to India was actually helpful in that regard too, because okay, I'm not living in a tar paper shack with filthy water. All right. I'm not self-actualizing fast enough for a 25-year-old middle-class person. That's not a real problem. And so I think that sort of putting the problems in perspective and just trying to find some some goodness in what you're doing next. And also, I just like really deriving specific lessons from these kinds of failures. And I think that's another part that's really important to me, is that rather than simply allow like sort of this hazy notion of what you learn, I'm a big believer in writing things in writing things down. I'll give you a better example of that. And this is, I don't want to call this like a major failure because it's not that significant. But so I did a TV show for National Geographic, and I worked with a TV series, and I worked with some really great people, and we put on a really freaking great show, and it didn't get picked up for a second season, and so it was disappointing, but it's not like a massive failure. It's not like anything real, like in life. But at that time, what I did is I said, I basically created a file and said, okay, here's what I learned from this. Here are the things that I learned from this experience. Like, one, I like working with really talented people. People who help me perform better. Two, I don't like to be involved in projects that I don't have full creative control over. Three, working with people in traditional television can be very perilous because they're subject to all kinds of pressures that are out of their control. And so you have this experience where things didn't go the way you wanted to, but if you actually literally write down the lessons, I think you can get something positive out of it.
And was the writing down of these lessons more of a cathartic exercise, or would you go back and revisit that?
You know what? I like for me, a lot of times what I will do is, for me, it's sometimes certain writing things down is simply the act of writing it down is enough to solidify it. So I'll do the kind of thing where before a talk or something like that, I will like write an outline, like basically I'll know what I want to do, and then I'll take notes and write an outline of the speech and the points I want to hit. And then I literally will not look at it. Like I sometimes won't even bring it up with me. I'll forget to bring it up with me because the act of actually memorializing it is really what gives it its oomph.
This is
but what I don't want, what I'm trying to say in a somewhat ham-handed way is that, like, when you want to you don't want those kinds of lessons to be hazy too much. You want to actually what specific thing did I actually derive from this? And I think that's really useful. There's also a great technique that Tina Seelig has used. Tina Seelig, who's at Stanford, has used, where she talks about, she writes a failure resume. So she has a resume of all of her failures, and then with each one, what she learned from it.
When would she use something like that?
I mean, she keeps it for herself, but she would use it.
Oh, I see. It's an ongoing working document, just like a regular resume.
Yeah. An ongoing working document that basically, so you can look at it and say, okay, boy, I made a lot of mistakes, but here's what I learned from it, and don't make the same mistake a second time. I don't mind making mistakes. What I don't like is making the same mistake twice.
With the two questions on India, why India? And then second, how did you decide to find the compelling, I suppose, benefits of continuing with law school versus changing course?
Let's see. You know what? I think, so on the second one, I think I was too risk averse to change course fully. I think that would have been too much, excuse me, too much of like a narcissistic injury just to like leave altogether. I probably would have felt like an abject failure. So I don't even think that was in the cards. So on the why India, a couple reasons. I'd always been fascinated by it. I knew that I could get around, the previous summer I had been to Southern Africa, and and it was the first. I had never been out of the country until I was 23 years old. Never been, and so the first time I left the country, I went to Southern Africa. I raised some money to do a project there, and that was a revelation. Like, holy crap, this world is a lot bigger than I thought. And so I wanted to go to some place that wasn't, Europe, or some place that was a little bit more different from the United States. And so India was a place that I'd always been fascinated by. It spoke English and it was cheap.
That's a compelling combination for someone leaving law school for a period of
Well,
time.
when you're 25 years old or however old I was, and you have like a little money in your pocket, but you could go so far on so little money. It was unbelievable to me. Especially if you're willing to like sleep over, like take overnight trains rather than pay for a place to stay, or live in these, go to sleep in these places where there's just a row of beds on a balcony and then mosquito nets over each one.
So travel is one of those gifts that keeps on giving, in a sense. I would put books in that same category.
I agree.
You've written a lot of books. You've read even more books. Besides your own, and I'll just kind of segue into a couple of short questions. What books, are there any books that you've gifted often to other people or repeatedly to other people?
Oh yeah. So they're probably books that it might have been books that you've covered in your show here. So one of them is Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott.
So great.
One of the greatest things ever. I come back to that advice so many different times. It's a saying even in the Pink household, where like we'll just say like one member of my family will say to the other who's struggling, okay, bird by bird, bird by bird. And so I am a huge, and I stumbled into this book. I remember where I got this next book. I got it in the airport in San Francisco, in the bookstore in the San Francisco SFO. And for some reason, I picked it up because it had this really weird cover. But one of the first editions of The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield had this kind of silvery cover to it. And I bought that book I think it was the Compass bookstore in SFO, just because wow, that's kind of cool. It has a silver cover and it's really short. And I got it and it's like, oh my God, I can't believe how good this book is. And so I even have a little sign on my desk here that says beat the resistance. So I've given that book out a lot too. So Pressfield, Anne Lamott, and then, man, I have to say Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, is up there too. It's less, I give it to be, I've given that out less, but that's a hugely important book for me.
Yeah, that's one of those books I really need to reread, and I think you've actually spoken about. Let me get this right. I was about to say Animal House, but that is not right. Animal Farm.
Oh my God, Animal Farm is one of the greatest books ever.
And how it's a completely different experience as a book at different points in your life.
Absolutely right.
And the last time I read Man's Search for Meaning was probably, I would say, 7 to 10 years ago. And a lot has changed in my life in that period of time. I think that is worthy of a reread. And it sounds like you've reread each of these books, also Bird by Bird, The War of Art, Man's Search for Meaning, yourself. You've read these more than once. Yeah, I have. I've read them more than once, yeah.
And but I'm not like a chronic rereader. I'm like there are some people who are regularly there are relatively few books that I have reread. But those I absolutely have. And once I had another experience in college. The only thing I remember in college are shards of things that professors said, like basically one-liners. But I had a professor once in college who, in an American Studies course, he assigned us to read The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. So you're in college and your professor assigns you to read The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. People are like, oh, because like everybody read that book in high school. And he said the following words. He says, I know you've read that book, but you haven't read that book, meaning the person you are today. And that ends up being true. So when I read Animal Farm at different points in my life, and had a different view on it. I've read Great Gatsby at different points in my life. I have seen the play Death of a Salesman perform, I don't know, probably 7 times. And each one feels a little bit different to me. I had a completely different view of Death of a Salesman once I became a father versus before I became a father.
I can imagine.
I had another view of Death of a Salesman before I knew about had read about psychopharmacology and mental illness, and after I did. And so, I think that experience, I think those kinds of experiences are really fascinating. Animal Farm, I was like, oh, this is really cool. It's about the Soviet Union and how power corrupts and blah, 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 blah. And now I read the book. It's like, okay, this book is basically about organizational dysfunction. This book, who cares whether it's supposed to be about the Soviet Union? This book is about the Acme Widget Corporation and how screwed up human organizations are. Like this, I think that Animal Farm should be in every organizational behavior class in an MBA program.
That's another one I need to reread. Not a long book either. I mean, I read that in sixth grade or something. I mean, completely
you'll see it completely. You'll see it completely differently. That's a great book. I've read 1984 multiple times too. Also
a very timely book. Let's read these days.
I have on that front. I read The Handmaid's Tale for the first time. I was sort of 30 years late to it that I read, and I loved that book. I have a whole. I'm not joking around. And if you want validation, I'll send you a photograph of it. I basically have a stack of books right here that's basically dystopia books that includes Philip Roth, The Plot Against America. An Octavia Butler book, Sinclair Lewis, It Can't Happen Here, another sci-fi book called by Elliot Pepper called Cumulus, another one called Infomocracy by Malcolm Older. I have a whole pile of dystopian works.
Why is that? Why do you read
I want
so
to
much
understand.
dystopian?
I want to understand the current moment more clearly.
So, well, this might be an appropriate next question. It doesn't have to be related to what you just said, but if you could put a short message on a billboard, metaphorically speaking, to get a word, a quote, a question out to millions or billions of people, what might you put on that billboard?
Well, it's interesting because I think it is related to what we were just talking about, or maybe the fact that you asked it in this context made me relate it. But one of the things that I would write would be assume positive intent. That would fit very nicely on a billboard. Assume positive intent, because I think, and I've changed my view on this, Tim. I've actually, in some ways, become. I've sort of gone the reverse. Like basically, the general view is that people are idealistic when they're young and cynical when they're older, and I've actually become less cynical as I've gotten older. The other thing is basically on politics, like there's this old line in politics, like everybody dies a Republican.
Right.
Because as you get older and you have something to conserve, you become more conservative. I found myself going actually the opposite direction as I understand more about the world. But the point of all that and assume positive intent is that I think, and it goes to our politics right now, is that a lot of times, I just think like your defaults, you know this already. Our default settings are so important in any realm of our life. And I think a lot of times, if your default setting is that everybody you deal with has negative intent, that's going to lead you down one pathway. There's no question about it. And here's the thing. I don't think that's true. My experience as a human being is that some people obviously have negative intent, but most people do not. Most people actually have positive intent. So my view is that if you assume positive intent on the part of others and let them disprove that, that's a better way to go than to assume negative intent and say, I'm going to assume that you have negative intent, Tim Ferriss, until you prove that you actually have positive intent. I think just doing the reverse is better. It's like assume positive intent. Not that I'm not Pollyanna here. I don't think everybody has positive intent. But I think most people do. And if you just make that your default setting, you're going to have better interactions with people. You're going to learn a lot more.
The default state, as you put it, in this case, creates a completely different experience of reality.
Absolutely.
Whether it's guilty until proven innocent, as you look at everyone and anything around you, or innocent until proven guilty. And I remember you're talking about these one-liners, these shards that stick in the mind. I remember I can't recall who said this to me, but they said, if you go out one day, you walk around and you meet an asshole, that person is an asshole. If, on the other hand, you go out and everyone you meet is an asshole, you're the asshole. And if you assume that everyone has negative intent, you yourself become that which you loathe.
Nice point. That's a really good point.
And
That's actually a really good point.
I love that. Assume positive intent. Well,
it also fits on a billboard.
It does.
You know, that's the other thing. I was actually taking that thing very literally. It's like I'm literally picturing in my head like what could fit on the billboard.
Well, I think that's a great place to wrap. I mentioned a few things at the top of the show. danpink.com, at Daniel Pink on Twitter, Facebook, Daniel H. Pink. Is there anything else that you would like to mention as closing comments, or request and ask of the audience? Anything else you would like to say?
No, I mean, we've covered a lot. We've covered a lot of ground, and you know, if people have listened this far, God bless them. I mean, even I'm not that ungrateful to ask for something more after this kind of indulgence.
Well, I'm a big fan of your work. I have been for a very long time, and including Johnny Bunko.
Thank you.
Which I still have to this day. So you may recall ages ago, lifetimes ago, I think it was at South by Southwest actually, which is timely since I now live in Austin, Texas. You you signed a copy of that book for me, which I still have. I've carried it with me.
I remember where we were sitting.
Yeah. So
I do.
So I appreciate it, and I still have the book. And it's really been nice to reconnect and catch up a bit.
Indeed, yeah. It's been fun. You know, obviously, it's been fun to watch all the great things that you're doing, and just how this massive audience that you've built, and just, you know, I've gotten so much. I have my dog-eared. You know, it's too bad we don't on video, but I could show you my dog-eared copy of Tools of Titans, which is a great book title, by the way.
It is the only book title that came easily. It is the only one. All the other ones were agonizing sessions of brainstorming and picking one of the titles among many that I felt dissatisfied with. Tools of Titans, for whatever reason, thanks to the universe or whatever powers that may be, or luck that may have happened upon me, but that is one that just kind of came, and I was like, oh yeah, no, that's the title, and that was it.
I also didn't realize that you were in Austin. How did you end up in Austin? Or why did you end up in Austin?
Yeah, it's I have felt a gravitational pull to Austin for a very long time. I, in fact, wanted to move here right out of college, but I didn't get the job at Trilogy Software. I made it to a final round of interviews, which brought me out to Austin. Really fell in love with the town. The baseline of friendliness and warmth here, of neighborly feel, is higher than just about any other place I've experienced. And then, instead of getting a job here, I got a job in the Bay Area, which took me to San Jose and Mountain View and San Francisco for the better part of nearly 20 years, which I loved for that period of time. But much like with books, I think that you visit places and your experience of those places changes over time. And what attracted me to the Bay Area, I think, has morphed into something else, and I have also morphed into someone else. And it felt like a good time for me to experiment with a new location. Also, I found myself within the very almost inescapable conversation of tech to be just drinking the Kool-Aid a little too heavily, or repeating, or believing my own bullshit, maybe not necessarily bullshit, but getting caught up in a lot of platitudes that are thrown around so often in Silicon Valley to have become part of the daily vernacular. And that scared me, quite frankly, that I was like, wait a second, if I look back at the last 5 to 6 months, how many conversations have I had that don't include the following 12 words or 12 expressions?
Oh, yeah.
I was I can actually count them on both hands.
Interesting.
And
interesting.
Yeah.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up at the very end of Long Island, and was born a townie in the Hamptons, which is a very odd thing to be.
I see.
And for anyone who's seen The Affair, I have not, but I've heard that The Affair, this TV show that is apparently quite popular, a lot of it takes place in this restaurant called the Lobster Roll, which is in Montauk. And I used to be a busboy at the Lobster Roll.
Nice.
So Long Island is where this whole thing started.
Weirdly, I remember from 4-hour work week, I think that you described yourself as a hellion,
A little hellion. Good memory.
which is a great word.
Yeah.
Oh, it's just such a great word. Yeah.
Yeah,
So but I realized I didn't have any geographic sense of where you grew up.
Yeah,
That's interesting.
I think the use of hellion is actually in the dedication to my parents and my
Yeah,
mom.
I think that's right. That's right. You know why? And one reason I remember that is that I listened to I got part of that book on audiobook. And I remember at the beginning, because you read that book, I'm almost certain. Yeah.
It was Ray Porter, who has a voice that is easily
Wait, you read that book?
mistaken for my various mannerisms that I've developed now via podcasting. So that was Ray Porter, who did a great job.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure that but I know it's just a great word.
It is a good word. It is a good word.
It's a great word.
And
I'm going to try to use it in the next 24 hours. When I hear a good word, I try to drop it in the next 24 hours, just because it helps reinforce it for me.
Well, I'm going to try to use surrogation, and I am going to try to eat more hard-boiled eggs in the next 24 hours.
You're golden. Man. Your life will change markedly if you start employing the principle of surrogation while eating hard-boiled eggs. Everything will. The sun will come shining up, and the sun will burst out from behind the clouds, and unicorns will scamper across your front lawn.
Well, my dog will love that. And Dan, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for having me.
time.
I appreciate it. It was a lot of really interesting.
And for everybody listening, as always, you can find links to everything, including Dan's social website, the new book, When, and much more in the show notes, which you can find at tim.blog/podcast. And until next time, thanks for listening.
Hey guys, this is Tim again. Just a few more things before you take off. Number one, this is 5 Bullet Friday. Do you want to get a short email from me? Would you enjoy getting a short email from me every Friday that provides a little morsel of fun before the weekend? And 5 Bullet Friday is a very short email where I share the coolest things I've found or that I've been pondering over the week. That could include favorite new albums that I've discovered. It could include gizmos and gadgets and all sorts of weird shit that I've somehow dug up in the world of the esoteric as I do. It could include favorite articles that I've read and that I've shared with my close friends, for instance. And it's very short. It's just a little tiny bite of goodness before you head off for the weekend. So if you want to receive that, check it out. Just go to 4hourworkweek.com. That's 4hourworkweek.com, all spelled out, and just drop in your email and you will get the very next one. And if you sign up, I hope you enjoy it. This episode is brought to you by WeWork. I love WeWork. I haven't had an office in many years, since 2000 or so, when I had my last real job, I suppose, in quotation marks. But when I moved from San Francisco to Austin not long ago, I decided, you know what? I'm tired of working at home. I'm tired of working in coffee shops. So one of the very first things I did was to get a space at WeWork. I could not be happier with this change in my life. WeWork is a global network of workspaces where companies and people grow together. The idea is really simple. You focus on your business, and WeWork takes care of all the rest, including front desk service, utilities, refreshments, and more. I also often have things shipped from Amazon and elsewhere to my office at WeWork. Here in Austin, I've been completely blown away by the members-only events, special offers, and perhaps the best cold brew coffee on tap that I've ever had. It's been amazing. It's been a real change in my life and improved my quality of life. And there are also dog-friendly WeWork locations all over the place. How fun is that? WeWork caters to everyone from entrepreneurs and freelancers to startups and even large enterprises, including GE, Salesforce, Microsoft, MasterCard, Samsung, Spotify, Pinterest, and Red Bull, among many others. In fact, more than 10% of Fortune 500 companies currently use WeWork, and it's a rapidly growing group. In other words, it's not just solopreneurs and ground-level startups that use WeWork, but everything from that to the big companies who are seeing very huge benefits as well. WeWork believes that creating spaces where people can connect and create meaning together right? And after all, if you are someone who has built a business modeled on the principles of the 4-hour workweek or elsewhere, it can be a lonely road sometimes. Even though you're digitally connected, it can feel very, very isolating. So in these spaces, you can connect with real humans and all the while use space more efficiently and cost effectively, which makes you and your business better equipped to face the challenges of today and tomorrow. WeWork now has more than 200 locations, so you can find great spots all over the world. So head over to we.co/Tim. That's we.co, C-O. So we.co/Tim to become a part of the global WeWork community. At the very least, I encourage you to check out pictures of some of the locations around the world. There are some incredible spots. So check it out, we.co/Tim. This episode is brought to you by Four Sigmatic. You might remember Four Sigmatic for their mushroom coffee, which was created by those clever Finnish founders. And when I first mentioned that coffee on this podcast, the product sold out in less than a week. It lights you up like a Christmas tree, which can be really useful. However, recently I've been testing the opposite side of the spectrum, a new product. And that is their reishi mushroom elixir to help me end my day, to get to sleep. As you guys may know, longtime listeners at least, I struggled with insomnia for decades. I've largely fixed that, but still shutting off my monkey brain has never been easy, still isn't easy very often. And I found reishi, which I've been fascinated by for a few years now, has been very, very effective and calming. Their old formula, however, Four Sigmatic's old formula, included stevia, and I like to avoid sweeteners, all sweeteners, for a host of reasons. And I then just pinged them and asked, hey guys, I would love to experiment with this and maybe actually suggest it, but I'd like a version without sweeteners if you'd be open to it. If too much of a headache, don't worry. And they are always game for experimentation. And so they created a special custom version without the stevia, without sweeteners. Now it is part of my nightly routine. Their reishi elixir comes in single-serving packets, which are perfect for travel. And in fact, I'm about to leave the country right now, and I have a packet in front of me that's just going to sit in the end of my carry-on bag. You only need hot water, and it mixes very, very easily. Here's some recommended copy that they put in the read. So I'm going to read it, and then I'll give you my take. Quote, a warning for those in the experimental mindset. Reishi is strong and bitter, in parentheses, like any great medicine, so if the bitterness is too much, I recommend trying it with honey and or nut milk, such as almond milk. End quote. So I'm going to say, no, you should suck it up and you should drink the tea because it's not that bitter. And maybe you should take the advice of old Chinese people when they're criticizing youngins when they say, 不能吃苦, which means you're not able to eat bitterness. Bitter is, in many cases, an indication of things that help liver detoxification and so on. Not saying that's the case here, but I've tested this reishi elixir on family members, on friends. Everybody has liked it. It's a little bit earthy. It's not that hard. So I would just say, suck it up and no, don't put in honey or nut milk or any of that shit. Just drink the goddamn tea. It's delicious, I think, right? If you like pu'er, that kind of stuff, that type of tea, you're going to dig it. So just try it. Okay, back to then my read. If you'd like to naturally improve your sleep, both onset and quality, I think, naturally, you might just enjoy this reishi elixir without any sweeteners. It has organic reishi extract, organic field mint extract, organic rose hips extract, organic tulsi extract. And that's it. No fancy stuff, no artificial, whatchamacallit, anything. So check it out. Go to foursigmatic.com/Ferris and get 20% off this special batch. I don't know if they're going to be making much more of this since it was made specifically for you guys. So do me a favor and try it out so that they continue to be open to experimenting with me to create products for you guys specifically. Check it out, Four Sigmatic. That's FOURSIGMATIC.com/Ferris, FERRISS, and get 20% off the special batch. And you must use the code Ferris to receive your discount, FERRISS. So again, go to foursigmatic.com/Ferris and then use code Ferris for 20% off of this rare, exclusive, limited run of reishi mushroom elixir for nighttime routines without any sweeteners. Enjoy.